I think it goes without saying that the Austrian Grand Prix was better than the Styrian Grand Prix. But by how much? It's time to find out. And we're gonna be answering our question of the video, which we pass on to you first. What are your thoughts on the penalties that the drivers got for their turn 3 incidents? We're gonna answer that question towards the end of this video. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel. Now, when getting into scoring the first half of the race cast, what got your attention?
You know, I was initially concerned because it looked like we had a relatively clean start, but then, oh wait, never mind, there are yellow flags being waved, there's a safety car, what's going on? Poor Esteban Ocon, his race already over after it had just begun. But as expected, this is a track where we see a lot of driver movement in those opening laps. You had both Ferraris and Daniel Ricciardo making their way up, trying to fix their errors made in qualifying, but then unfortunately we also saw George Russell drop out of the points pretty much immediately, down in 12th after the first couple of laps.
And I have to give it to the Red Bull Ring, because when we got back after the safety car restart, those laps are always so exciting to watch. We have the battle for P2 between Lando and Sergio, kicking it off right off the first turn. Sergio ends up going wide, and then next thing you know, it's a straight line speed battle up to turn 3. In this particular case, we have the Red Bull going wide onto turn 3, and we get our first racing incident.
I feel like this incident is really what set the tone for the rest of the race. Sergio gets somewhat pushed wide, considering there wasn't technically a full car's width, but ultimately it was his decision to try to overtake on the outside line. Lando had the racing line, he was ahead. It was kind of chaotic, wondering how this was going to be interpreted.
So going from that, we now move over to a DRS train going on in the midfield in those bottom few points position places. And although this train kept all the drivers close to each other on track, it kind of removed all the excitement of potential overtakes happening.
After several laps of all the drivers being so close to each other, you finally had Ricciardo make a move on Vettel to move up into 5th place. Really substantial considering Ricciardo started in 13th. And at this point, it seemed like things were finally kicking it into gear. We were seeing some overtakes, close wheel-to-wheel battles, and that DRS train was finally starting to give us some proper on-track action.
When looking towards the front of the field, we have a great battle going on between Hamilton and Lando. Hamilton's trying to push throughout multiple corners, trying to get past, and he eventually finally does. And at the same time, Norris ends up getting officially a 5-second time penalty for his incident with Perez.
But Lando Norris wasn't the only driver to get given a penalty in this first half. You also had Giovinazzi and Tsunoda handed 5-second penalties each.
So at this moment, most of the drivers are coming into the pits. Surprisingly, most drivers have a clean pit stop. Sergio's is a bit long, but nonetheless. Lando ends up serving his 5-second time penalty, which gives Valtteri the jump on him into 3rd place, and now Norris is back on the hunt. And you also got to see a great overcut by Ricciardo. It really seemed like staying out longer was the right strategy in this race. And so this brings us to our halfway mark in this race. Cass, how'd you score it?
My excitement was at a 6, and it's not because I don't think this race was super entertaining. It was just a little bit difficult to follow the decision making at times. You had drivers going up and then dropping back, and why are there so many penalties? It just took away from my overall feelings towards this first half. I did put the racing at a 7 because we were seeing some very interesting overtakes. Sometimes it was very risky, sometimes it didn't pay off, but I was much happier in comparison to last weekend. And then drama I put at a 6.5 because I wasn't used to us seeing this many very strange penalties being handed out, and you didn't really know yet, aside from Max, where people were going to finish. So that puts my first half score at a 6.5.
Whereas on my side, I was a bit indifferent with the first half. I scored my excitement at a 5. I was still interested to seeing what was happening in that midfield battles. In terms of the racing, I also scored that a 5. I was really interested to see how the Mercedes would do in these battles on track, as they weren't out in front necessarily, but sort of that excitement got taken away with the Perez and Lando incident. And in terms of the drama, much similar to you with all the different penalties going on, I scored that a 7. Scoring my first half, when you put all those together, a 5.6. I'm gonna round that down to a 5.5.
Jumping right into the second half, we were immediately greeted with a wonderful overtake from Russell on Stroll. You had George diving down into the inside line, Lance going a little bit wide, didn't look like he defended too hard, but regardless, it was a brilliant move. And then right after this, we had another DRS train forming, this time between Gasly, Ricciardo, Perez, and Leclerc.
You had Perez needing to make some massive defensive moves against Leclerc as they were going back and forth.
Once again, overtaking at turn 3 is just not going in anybody's favor today, as Leclerc tries to go around the outside. Checo doesn't really give him any space. Leclerc dips his tires off into the gravel and kind of gets set back a little bit, but it was basically a copy-paste move, so we were essentially waiting to see if the FIA were going to be consistent in how they handed out penalties.
And the short answer here is yes. Checo ends up getting a 5-second penalty, and you'd think he would learn his lesson because not only that, 10 laps later, the incident repeats itself.
This time at turns 5 and 6, Leclerc and Perez go at it again. Leclerc loses out yet again from being somewhat shoved off the track. Because it was basically another similar scenario, Checo gets another 5-second penalty, so he's dealing with a 10-second time frame here, and the laps are starting to run out.
But that's not the only action happening out on track. As we look up the grid, you have Lando making substantial gains on the two Mercedes, one which Hamilton is struggling with some floor damage by going over the curbs a bit too aggressively, and Valtteri being held up in this instance. You have some inter-team communication on whether the Mercedes can race or not. Next thing you know, they are permitted to do so, but then Hamilton gets the call to say, let Valtteri by, just so that they don't lose 2 positions to the McLaren. And so Valtteri gets by, and now we watch Lando chase Hamilton to get past him once again to regain a position on the podium.
But from here on out, it's just sheer chaos. You have Stroll getting a 5-second penalty. You have Yuki getting a 5-second penalty for the same reason as in the first half. You have Mazepin and Kimi both getting waved the black and white flags. The only person here that was safe was Max. He was so far ahead that he was able to get another pit stop with 10 laps to go just out of pure safety.
And he ends up securing that fastest lap by doing this pit stop, taking it away from Mercedes.
But with the laps dwindling down, this did not mean that we got less racing. If anything, there were more wheel-to-wheel battles than ever. You had Russell and Alonso going head-to-head for so long.
Alonso ends up pulling off the move, and this moves George out of the points. And this wasn't our only panic situation. You also have the battle between Ferrari on Ricciardo.
On so many occasions, Leclerc was getting so close to Ricciardo's rear. I was getting frustrated at times because it really looked like if there was a lockup, Charles could have potentially knocked himself and Daniel out of the race. But with a couple of laps left to go, the Ferraris swapped places because Carlos had better pace, and suddenly the gap was dwindling until Carlos is able to make the overtake on Ricciardo on the last lap.
And if you thought that wasn't enough, we still had more chaos to come on that last lap.
I barely even know how to describe this one. Kimi is just kind of trudging along, looking at the back of Russell's car. Vettel comes up on the inside and is clearly moving ahead, but then Kimi just kind of swerves into him and they both are out of the race.
So I feel like the second half is going to be a bit harder to score. Cass, what'd you think?
Honestly, I scored my excitement the same as the first half at a 6 because I went through a lot of highs and lows in this second half. There were some really good points where you had some close battles, but then there was other points where I was kind of disappointed with some people's performances and the way that things played out. Maybe that's personal bias, but it is what it is. I also scored the racing a 6. It was pretty similar to the first half, but there were just so many more mistakes happening that, I kind of had to take points away because it was sloppy. But the drama, on the other hand, I scored at an 8 because there were so many penalties. A lot of them were confusing, drivers making the same mistake more than once, and then last lap overtakes combined with a last lap collision. I mean, overall, that's pretty damn dramatic. So overall, that puts my second half score at a 6.6. I'm gonna bring that down to a 6.5.
On my side, though, I was quite thoroughly entertained in the second half. My excitement was all the way up at an 8. There were so many different battles happening all throughout the field that were getting my emotions involved, which correlates with the racing, which I also scored at an 8. Lots of drivers going wheel to wheel around several corners, ending off in some pretty dramatic moments, which is why I also scored that an 8 here. So you can guess what my total score for the second half is. An 8. So when you combine both of our scores together, the total score for the Austrian Grand Prix comes out to around a 6.6. We're gonna round that down to a 6.5. Here's how the race stands versus the other races so far this season. A fair score for the Austrian Grand Prix, and we're excited to see how it will progress over the upcoming races. And now moving on to our question of the video. Were the penalties given out during this race fair? As we said, let us know your thoughts down in the comments. Cass, what do you think?
I think it is a little bit of a complicated situation when there is not a full car's width between the drivers. Yes, Checo and then Leclerc did run wide because there wasn't enough space for their cars. But at the same time, their competitors had the racing line. They had the inside corner. So I don't fully know where they were expecting to go. I am personally thinking that Lando did not deserve that 5-second penalty, and if he hadn't been awarded a 5-second penalty, I don't think Perez would have gotten one either, but the FIA were trying to be consistent in how they were applying 5-second penalties.
You have a lot of people saying if this hard racing isn't being encouraged by the FIA, we're not going to see the types of driving and wheel-to-wheel action that we want to see. So maybe just extending the track and making it a bit more wide is the best of both worlds. Not only do the drivers not end up going into the gravel if they do get pushed wide, but also the drivers don't get penalized for hard racing.
This is obviously a little bit of a gray zone because some people are going to believe that the penalties were justified, and then you're going to have some others who say there should be a little bit more leniency for these types of situations. So that's why we want to hear from you.
And so that's our race review for the Austrian Grand Prix. We're going to be back here with another video next week while we wait for the British Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time. You don't want to miss out on it, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like this video if you haven't done so already.
As per usual, make sure to follow us on social media at CCF1 channel to keep the conversation going and get all the latest updates.
And we will catch you in the next video.
Bye.